So, welcome everyone to this week's discussion topic. Uh, I am brought to you by this new microphone so that you can listen better to my soft, silky English voice. It may be a little bit quiet in the recording as I've tested a few times. Overall, seems fine though, and still perfectly listenable. So, today we're going to be basically talking about characters, character writing, how to do characters, and everything in between. So, we're going to be going over, why actually have characters to tell stories at all, how characters fit into the Ancerios setting from an in character and an out of character perspective, um, what makes sort of like characters integral to really prominent moments in story, character roles and purposes, sort of like for the story of why you want these characters, how to flesh out your character, what's considered too much, what's considered too little, growing and developing your character along with the story as it progresses, overwhelming stories or too many characters or too many cook scenarios and how they might occur, what that entails, how to do character death, what to do, what not to do, how to talk about character design styles, so like how do you want your character to look from an artistic standpoint, tropes to avoid, and examples of both good and bad characters in Ancerios. So first things first, I don't need to explain to you what a character is. I'm going to assume that you're not quite that brain dead. Instead, why have characters to tell stories? Well, you can, and it is perfectly capable of telling a story purely from a narrator's point of view. You could give a top down view of what's happening, and you could explain to the audience kind of the overall story tone and the events that are kind of going on, yeah? Now, that's fine for parts of story writing, yeah? There are parts that you could do that with fine, to give context, to set the scene, etc. But you mostly, and for the overwhelming majority, will want to use characters to tell the story, yeah? Because a character is something that everyone here can relate to. And at the end of the day, you're not there to read an extremely bland, sort of like dreary Star Wars scroll. Although to be fair, like the sequels, they could have probably done a better job with the scroll. But you get the point of you relate to a character, you want to see that character grow, you want to experience the world, the story, the other characters, and the events from their eyes. You want to feel the emotion that they feel, you want to put yourself in their shoes. And for this reason, you use characters to tell stories in the same way as you would want to experience them. And again, you could use this kind of overhead narrator to give context and whatnot, but you're always going to be doing that as a background, adding on to paragraphs and sections of character writing, yeah? Where two characters are discussing something going on, the narrator might add in a section of a paragraph giving a context, for example. But you will always want to tell the point of view from an above sort of point of view, yeah? A key sort of example of this, I guess, is in Ancerios. I'll just pull out an example. Is you've got the destruction of Line, yeah, where there was a big battle and a city that was being fought over got destroyed by a nuclear strike. Okay, now we could have perfectly just narrated that, yeah. However, we told it through people's views, through tabletop roleplay as well as character writing, and we showed up front, close and personal, the absolute terror, horrificness, and more of that situation. That made people feel. That made people go, oh, Jesus, that was awful. Like, I would never want to be in that situation. That is the point. You want people to feel. If your reader isn't feeling for characters and isn't feeling for story, then, you know, just go and do a Star Wars scroll, I suppose. So that kind of neatly ties into, how characters fit within the Ancerios setting. Well, at a character, it's obvious we do it to actually give the story some life, yeah? We want you guys, as the players, and also readers and observers, to read the stories and feel emotive. That's kind of the whole point. We're here to escape our lives. We're here to create something better. We're here to um, really establish a universe here which feels lived in. And you're going to need characters to do all of those things and basically expand on these events that are happening and really kind of, make it hammer home, yeah? In character, characters fit into Ancerios as your means of role playing. You know, you all have various characters that you will flesh out your nation with, or flesh out whatever stories you're doing with. That might be the national leader, or it might be a person in government, or it might be just a normal civilian, or it could be an individual that you've created for a specific roleplay, for example, like a rogue mercenary, or somebody who's just out for work, or just any number of people who are pretty much there to facilitate this roleplay, because you're not really going to roleplay an emotive, engaging story by just kind of having like, oh well, the nation responds to this, and the fleet responds to this, and the fleet does this, and the army does that, and the nation accepts this trade agreement, blah blah blah. That is not like, that is roleplay. Yes, I will concede that. That is not emotive writing, and that's not collaborative world building, in my opinion. If you want to really flesh out a world, yeah, you want to make it feel lived in, okay? To make a world feel lived in, you have to be able to pick any point in that world where you can zoom in on a micro scale, pick out a civilian, okay, or just any person from a faction and a region of space, a military, any sort of like, just anybody, and be able to be like, right, tell me the life of this person. Does it make sense? Does it fit? And if I can randomly choose a guy on Lost Star and say that he works at a shipbreaker's yard, and he's kind of got some like money troubles because he's taken out a bit too much money through a shady Teleran banking scheme, and he's friends with a brute down the local pub from Venchester who loves drinking. Well, that's cool. Like, that's just a random guy that has no real bearing on the story, but it has bearing on the setting, because I've just described to you a random dude on Lost Star who doesn't really mean anything. But again, you build these characters that then will build the environment, that then will builds the setting, which then makes the setting feel lived in, which then means you can pick characters out of thin air and work with them. And just be able to be like, that NPC looks cool, I'm going to create a character from that. Or a forced from that, being led by this particular character. Or anything of the like, yeah? In character and out of character, ironically, they build the setting, but it's also a self-perpetuating cycle. Yeah? Super integral to everything. And that's why I believe that the best sort of like roleplay experience is had by writing these characters from all these different perspectives and building the setting from the ground up. So that's how characters fit into the setting. Players are more than welcome to just play individual characters. You don't have to play nations in this group. Obviously, I would say that it's easier to play a nation than to hop in with a character, purely because if you play with a nation, you get to better experience the kind of wider geopolitics of the group. You also get to interact with a lot more nations in the group, which gives you more knowledge of the general setting, other factions, characters, etc. And with that knowledge, you can then pick out and introduce a character that you might want to play for a specific character orientated roleplay, or for from a particular NPC, or for any purpose you want. Yeah, so it is very much possible to just play characters. Obviously, the majority of the RP in this group is done with characters, even if it is on a massive geopolitical scale. Key example being the Coronan Theatre, where it was gigantic strategic scale roleplay, but was pretty much done with, characters in focus from their point of view. And this, again, kind of ties neatly into the next section, which is, the importance and the integrity of good characters to memorable moments. Now, if you want to have a good story, you need to have a liked, or well, not even necessarily liked, like as in, he's a good person, but like, I guess an enjoyed character that's well built up, yeah? And people have seen this character kind of grow and blah, 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 blah. And they're kind of relatable. They've got some understandable aspects, but you've seen them do all of this sort of stuff, and an event happens to them, and you see that from their point of view. Now, they've been built up to the kind of level that they are relatable enough that you can place yourself into their shoes in an empathetic way, yeah? And you're now experiencing this really key story moment that, the GM or the player has been building up to, that is going to cripple this character sort of like mentally or emotionally, or like this major thing is going to happen. Because this character is relatable to you and you can empathize with them, that key moment to the story is going to hit all the more harder. Now, I was talking about integrity and sort of like how characters fit into the setting and how they develop the setting, and was talking about the Coronan Theatre. Well, a lot of players developed characters for the Coronan Theatre, yeah? Or used existing characters that they had that hadn't really been fleshed out in Ancerious yet, yeah? Those characters went in as nobodies. Nobody had heard of them before. Nobody cared, yeah? By the end of the Coronan Theatre, many of those characters, I would say the outright majority, are now known of by name. And they have a reputation. And they have gone through major story moments like Paradolia, which was the Psionic Inquisition of all living things in Borealia by the Psionic god Armin Lycos. And they've gone through fighting the Horseman fleets, the ultra-advanced, almost god tech, well, I would say god tech, Psionic armies, the army of the Panopticon. They fought against the endless von Neumann swarms of the old invaders. They've kind of wrestled geopolitically with all of these different factions, and they managed to, bring the Anwin, a old gigastructure, to life, to leave the region in one massive exodus, yeah? So these names who were nobodies have been so integral that they made moments like Paradolia, the activation of Anwin, the fighting against the Horsemen in the most, like, kind of, last stand terms possible, and the old invaders, from these kind of moments that in any other kind of role play would be a cool moment, yeah, but would kind of be one and done, into these absolute culminations of story sagas that will now live in the group memory for as long as the group lives. And those people will also probably have those stories with them for as long as they live. Yeah? I know I certainly will. I'm gonna always, for as long as I live, be proud of everyone and everything done in the Coronan Theatre in Borealia, yeah? Absolutely incredible story. And me and Swingfire were unsure initially, if we would be able to pull it off, if we would be able to pull off Paradolia, yeah? And then the community just comes out swinging with all of these characters that have been integral to their plot lines. They step up to the bar and they write literal novels worth of the most emotional, hard-hitting, incredible stuff that I would say is on par with or beats a lot of the novellas and novels that I've read in my time. So to say that kind of good built up characters are integral to really memorable story moments is an understatement. You want to have these characters who have built themselves up, yes, but they can also be nobodies. You can use memorable, important moments of storytelling to create good characters, but you can also use good characters to create memorable story moments. Yeah? It's a switcheroo. Both are equally important, and they can be done very well. Yeah? But I cannot stress that enough. That is something that you should always take to heart when creating characters, and if you're planning on running your own stories in roleplay, yeah? Is to have, it's all well and good having these big planned ultra moments where, you know, the good guys face down the bad guy, or the party faces some insurmountable odds, or there's a big kind of like, actually it was this all the time, and there's a big sort of like switch. That's all well and good, and it's going to be impactful, but if you've got these really awesomely written characters to go with it, they're just going to make it better. Yeah, they're just going to make it more impactful. In the same vein as if you've got a bunch of kind of like newish characters who are looking for development, if you throw them a big moment that's going to be defining, they're going to have the chance to make or break. Okay, maybe they don't get written amazingly. Maybe, you know, the person writing them isn't quite up to par with their skills. That's fine. Like, we all get there. We all go through that. But you can help them create these moments and help their characters, and in turn, their characters will help be defined by this moment and will be renowned in the group and by other players, yeah? So, the next section is character roles and purposes for the story, okay? Now, most characters, not all though, are created generally in roleplay for a purpose, okay? Be that to join a particular story roleplay, or to fill a niche in a nation, for example, like, oh, I need a national leader, I need an ambassador to this faction, I need a new spokesperson, general, or captain for like a military thing. They generally just get created and then kind of like, that's their one and done. And that's fine, because you can't turn every character into this big giga godlord who has like overcome all these odds and is known throughout the group, yeah? You are going to have many characters who you are going to use probably for one roleplay, and that's it. They might never be seen or heard from again, yeah? Occasionally they might come out now and again for another roleplay, they might be mentioned, and it's kind of like they still exist in the world, but obviously they're not out at the forefront doing every single thing. And it's really good, in my opinion, to have these repertoire of characters that you've used in many roleplays. For example, my nation, the Union of Worlds, for a long time was ruled by its military because it was an outpost colony, yeah? And because of that, individual ship captains had quite a lot of leeway politically and diplomatically. Because of that, they got used in a great deal of first contacts, diplomacy, negotiations, etc. And because I've done a lot of that over the years in Ancerious, I've got a lot of these throwaway characters who kind of popped up once or twice and have never been sort of like seen or heard from again. But they still get referenced now and again, and what they did to kind of like show that, you know, oh, you know, they're still out and about somewhere or whatnot. I like to have this vast repertoire of one and done characters, but I also like to cite them now and again. because that helps again make it feel like the setting's alive. You know, they're still out there. They're still an actual living, breathing character that we could pan the camera over to, and they'd be there, you know, chilling, doing their job or something, and nothing would change. It's not like panning the camera over and it being like, oh, actually, we haven't, like, I've got no idea what they're doing. And this kind of goes for like a GMing as well on like a tabletop basis, and you know, GMing from an Ancerious writing basis as well. It helps having this kind of like vast roster of one and done characters, because you can bring them out at any time back into the spotlight, especially when you're trying to do a big interconnected plot. You might be like, oh well, you know, there's a big political thing going on. Therefore, you know, I need like a political character who's, oh yeah, I can use this Baron that I wrote like twice a fair few years ago, or like a few months ago or whatever. I'll throw him in, and then when he turns up, your players might be like, oh, it's him again, like, and because of that, they then feel more engaged because they know the character, they know they have relations to him, they can then interact with him further, and it again makes it feel more relatable. It makes it feel like the universe is more lived in, and they're not just encountering another sort of like one and done, etc. Yeah? So you've got these kind of character roles. With the one and done side of things, you can also create characters for much more sustained stories. You know, I want to run a several RP long criminal underworld investigation one, and I want to create a criminal investigator or like an ex-police guy who is looking into things, and I'm going to use him for like 3 to 5 RPs. Yeah? Cool, no problem. All done. That's his purpose, that's his story. Maybe once you get to the end of the story, that's the end of his story. Maybe again, he might turn up now and again. You know, maybe he got a promotion at the end of it. Who knows? But you've got these kind of like intermediaries, and then you've obviously got the big characters, which is, you know, I've got this faction leader. They're obviously going to do all this different stuff. They're going to be super important to all my plots, or like I've got an entity or deity that are going to be really important to all my plots. They're going to be front and center. They're going to be your pride and joy, and they're going to be used more than anything else. Now, their purpose might actually be quite vague, and this is kind of touching on the fact that you don't actually need a role necessarily or a purpose. You can have these big characters that are there to really kind of get forefront of everything, but they don't necessarily need to have a purpose. They're just kind of there to, you know, interact. They might be like, oh yeah, well, my nation leader's going to go to this diplomacy, this negotiation, is going to talk to this person, be involved in this internal plot line. You know, they don't have a defined story. You could give them a defined story, and most people do, but they could just be kind of like doing things that are associated with running your nation. And because it's so important and it's so common, they're kind of front and center and always around. Well, that's cool. Like, they're still an engaging character that's well known. They're just not following some sort of like linear progression storyline, for example. So don't feel constrained by having to like, oh, you know, I've got to give my character a purpose or a role. Like, no, just create characters to have fun. Sure, if you need it for a particular thing, go for it. If not, create a character anyway and just have fun with it. Even if you just create a list of characters to maybe use on the side, eventually there's going to be a roleplay that somebody's going to be running, which you go, oh, that's perfect for him. Introduced, boom, done, you know? So, as I've kind of touched on the whole, you know, roles and purposes, one and done kind of thing, having lots of characters, we'll get onto the topic of fleshing out your character and what constitutes as too much or too little. So, I find with characters, less is more. Okay? Sure, you can go and you can do one of those big character sheets that you can find online, where you delve into, like, what's your character's biggest fear, and what's their favourite vegetable, and, like, what's their inside leg measurement, and all these kind of, like, weirdly niche questions that, yeah, okay, like, maybe they'll come up, like, once in a conversation, if someone's asked, or maybe there's a bit of context, but for the most part, It's kind of not really needed. Um, uh, Personally, when I say sort of like less is more, when you have a character, okay, you obviously want to know what they look like. Loose description. You don't have to fucking like detail their brow size or whatever. But just give them a bit of a backstory. Yeah, like they were this once, or they're like they have this occupation. Okay, they look like this, and this is their motive. Why are they in that story? Okay, what are they there for? Are they there for revenge? Are they there for power? Are they there just to get paid, to get on to the next job, to protect someone, to do their job? Like, doesn't matter, yeah? That's their motivation. That is all you need. That is all you need when fleshing out your character. As the story goes, you can then, if they're much more front and center and there's lots of story prompts in the roleplay to, go into backstory, go into sort of their likes, dislikes, a bit of their kind of mental landscape, then you can start fleshing it out as and when you need to. Now, of course, you can flesh this out prior. Again, like if you want to do a bit of an overview for them, maybe as I said with the sort of like sheet of characters, like he's stern, he's like a 6'4" big labourer who just wants to do the job. Cool, boom, you've got a guy, you got a template, yeah. Like then you could be like, oh, well actually he killed like 2 people once to protect his family, blah blah. Like all cool, like awesome. You got the stuff going for you. Don't flesh out shitloads. If you start fleshing out characters into the extreme, it starts getting into what we call stat post territory, because I've seen people who have made these characters that they've then poured their heart and soul into and detailed absolutely everything, and they kind of just want to tell you about it in character, and because of that, they could reply to a basic kind of like interaction in a role play with huge paragraphs about how like, oh, it reminds him of like this one time back in the day when like, oh, because he likes apples and he does this, and it kind of, it goes a bit too far. Now, if you want to do that, that's fine, like, but just be aware to keep the fleshing out on topic and contextual, yeah? Don't just info dump on the first post, yeah? Most role player GMs will usually put in prompts in role plays where you can talk about your characters. Or if they don't, and it's kind of one of those turns in a role play where there's not much going on, you can then use that turn to be like, right, well, my character doesn't really have much to do and I don't really have much to work on, so I'll just do a quick response covering like what my character's doing, or what my fleet is doing, or what my army is doing, and then I'll dive into like some of the history about the commander, or like a bit of his personality, or a bit of her personality, or like a bit of the unit's personality, or just use those kind of gaps to detail things. That's where you can start fleshing out, yeah? If need be. You don't have to, but that's kind of an option. Too little for fleshing out a character is where, like, you basically don't give a character a motivation, and some random, like, corpo dude turns up to an investigation in RP, and one of the other characters asks him, like, so, what are you here for? And you respond, they respond with, well, I just wanted the job. Okay, cool, why? Don't know, I just felt like it. Like, oh, okay, well, where'd you come from? And then the person's like, oh, well, I don't really know, like, I haven't really thought about that, or, like, something like that. That's the part where you're like, alright, well, it's just kind of an NPC with not much to go off. So, as long as you kind of establish a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of their personality, what they do, you know, what they look like, why are they there, you're fine. Like, that's kind of all you need. Anything less than that is starting to go into sort of like, this is kind of hard to work with territory. Um, as your character gets more and more into the story spotlight, has these big memorable moments, these defining kind of instances, that's when you start going into like their deep psyche, childhood trauma, and like major stuff that's happened to them, and you start using these kind of backstory events and whatnot to give context for why they are like that. Yeah? And this kind of goes into sort of growing and developing your character along with the story. Have it be natural. As I said, use these kind of like blank spaces in RP posts. If you're not sure what to write character stuff. Flesh out your character. Flesh out your nation. Flesh out the context of whatever military units you've got there. Bam. People will appreciate it. People like lore. And it means that you're still posting and that you're not getting bogged down. You're not like, oh, well, I don't really have a lot to do, I don't really know what to post. Post character stuff. Boom. Easy. That, again, grows and develops your character along with the story. The memorable moments, as said, is kind of like really defining for developing your character, because not only can they help you sort of delve into what makes your character in terms of, what terrible things have happened to them in their childhood, what defining moments have they had off screen in their like past or present or whatnot that have forged them into who they are today. But these memorable moments forge characters further and develop them in different directions that you might not necessarily have expected. It might give them new motivations. It might give them more experience. It might give them more kind of trauma, basically. Things to build off of. And again, it's this ever-growing cycle of just develop that leads to more development, that leads to more development, that leads to more development, and then they get more memorable, and then they do more cool stuff, and it just keeps on spiraling, yeah? So, don't be afraid to, as well, have your characters come out of their comfort zone, and don't be afraid, and this is going to be the key thing here, this is something I want to stress, don't be afraid to have your characters lose and get critically injured. Okay? I want all of you to think, anyone who's listening to this as well, to think, what are some of the most defining moments of your life? Moments that you can immediately think back on and go, that's what turned me into a twisted psychopathic individual who just wants to, end all life on Earth. Or this is what made me want to do this particular job, or be really virtuous, or try to save others, or like all of this sort of stuff. I can guarantee you, unfortunately, that a lot of that probably involves either some trauma or some bad periods in your life that defined who you are, yeah? Now, without those bad periods in your life who defined who you are, you wouldn't be who you are. In that same vein, characters cannot grow and develop in the story if they do not take hits. In the same way as we always say here, your nation should lose, your fleet should be destroyed, your army should be defeated, your characters as well need to lose. Whether that be a cunning enemy undoes all the efforts of their investigation, or somebody literally defeats them in a straight up fight, or they lose a really close friend NPC-wise, or maybe even another player character, or something along those lines that is traumatic to them, or, has like a really cool defining moment, that builds on them, okay? Maybe you have had this really noble guy who honestly wants to do good for his people, have this kind of like horrible traumatic moment that makes him realise, like, actually, I need to do more. And you know what? The ends do justify the means. And because of that, I'm going to do what I need to do. at the expense of other people, and then starts doing like all this kind of like really nasty shit, and makes other characters and other factions go like, whoa dude, like what are you doing? But in his eyes, he's doing exactly what he was doing before. He's just has more conviction, more fanaticism. Yeah, like you can through this way you can have villains turn to good guys turn to villains, etc. You know, so do not be afraid to have your character get really seriously screwed up, mentally or physically. Yeah, a Giga Warrior losing then now has to train harder to be able to beat who defeated them. Yeah. So with that, next section is overwhelming the story. You know, having too many characters and too many cook scenarios. So I'm just going to have a quick drink a second. So, this is a situation where you can have a story, but there's too many characters. And that can come in a variety of factors. It could be purely in a particular RP, where there's like 12 people trying to vie for the attention of the plot. It could be in a tabletop, where the same thing's happening, yeah? And it becomes harder to put characters into a spotlight, and therefore harder to give individual players defining moments for their character, yeah? And harder for individual players to have an impact in the plot. Or it could be a situation of a particular story arc has too many characters or too many inputs that just make it so hideously complex that nobody knows what's going on anymore. Yeah? So rather than perhaps telling an internal plot line through one or two characters, maybe, you know, having a internal uprising or civil war story arc, for example, being told through the eyes of perhaps its ruler, or someone who's like a loyalist, and then somebody who is either the leader of the revolution or a revolutionary, yeah? And you use those 2 points of view to tell the whole story through these characters' perspectives, experiences, etc. But if you're now using like 10 or 15 different characters to tell all of these different situations, that's fine if they're kind of one and done throwaway characters. But if they're all concurring sort of like characters, unless somebody is really in detail reading all of that plot line really closely, they're going to have a hard time discerning all these different characters and being like, wait, what's going on? Like, hold on, who is this again? Like, and suddenly you start to cross-reference, and it stops becoming about, like, enjoying the story and more just a fact of trying to figure out who fits with what. I'll use an example from IRL. The Horus Heresy series for Warhammer 40,000, okay, is a fantastic book series. It's a very long book series. It's like 60-something books, yeah? Now, it's fantastic and it's very enjoyable. However, it's so long and there's so many different characters that by the later books, you start to forget who individual characters are when they turn up later on. So, like, a character from book 5 or 7 might turn up in, like, book 40, and you might not know that it's them. And it'd be like, oh, you know, it's supposed to be a case of, oh, it's this person from earlier in the story. Do you remember them? Well, no, because so much time has passed. There's been so many other characters that I have no idea, like, who it is, you know? So, you need to know that when you're telling a story, too many characters is a too many cooks scenario, because you start getting lost in a spider web of cross-referencing, understanding, and general kind of complexity that becomes harder. Again, less is more. Now, if you are working with many different players for an overall plotline, yeah, you can adapt that plotline to enable lots and lots and lots of people to have their limelight and for everyone to easily know what's going on, yeah? It becomes a lot harder when it's an internal plotline to not kind of over-complexify it, yeah? So if you're going to do an internal plot, I definitely suggest less is more. In one of my examples, I am telling the story of the Union Reserve Administration, which is an internal faction in my main nation that are not good people, but they're doing stuff that they believe is right for both the Union and the galaxy. I am telling that through roughly 5, 6 people's points of view. Now, I could be telling it on a lot more people's points of view, but there's no real need, because all of those people who I'm telling the point of view from are in prime political or sort of military positions to be able to give the best overview of the situation, yeah? And I'm not going to expand that repertoire of characters until the plot develops to such a point of time where it's all out in the open, there's lots going on, and maybe I'll introduce a couple more characters to tell a more grounded citizen sort of point of view on things, yeah? But until then, I'm not going to create, like, another 10 characters to go through, because then it just becomes way too complicated and nobody knows what's going on. The less things that readers have to keep tabs on, the better, you know? Like, readers are great, however, while they will love to eat up your lore, if you start, like, cramming stuff in to be complex, some people love it, yes, but some people struggle with it. And so it's better to urge on the side of caution with that, okay? So, next up is character death. And this is always a fun one, which is what to do and what not to do. Now, obviously there are many different camps when it comes to character deaths. The two that I can really think of is, well, there's 3 really. One of them is the don't ever kill your characters camp. Okay, you can have them be maimed, you can have them be traumatized, just don't ever kill them. Okay, that is one way to do it, because obviously we are role playing, we are storytelling. You might have not many characters, and you might be attached to all of them, and you don't want them to die. That's fair enough. Don't ever let anyone kill your characters without permission. Now, if a roleplay does state at the start that there may be chance for character death and for that to be involved, don't join that roleplay unless you are prepared for that, okay? Because that can and will happen. However, if you don't want your characters to die, that's fine. Don't feel pressured. You do it in your own time. On the opposite end is the, I need to kill all my characters. My name's George R.R. Martin and I can't write for shit, yeah? Where people just kill off their characters left, right, and centre for shock value. Now, I'll give a hot take here. Doesn't work. Doesn't work at all. You don't get attached to characters because you know that they're going to die. And then when you do get attached to characters, they instantly get killed for some extremely mundane, retarded reason. And because of that, you lose interest in the plot. Okay? Now, because of that, at using Game of Thrones as a reference, it's basically a case of, imagine that same story, but like 75% of the character deaths didn't happen the way that they did. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a shitload more story that you can write. A shitload more defining moments that can happen, yeah? You don't have to just kill people, like, in a random fight, okay? Like, that I'm sorry, but it doesn't work. This is my personal opinion. If you want to kill, like, your characters off constantly and regularly, sure. Personally, I'm not going to get invested in your characters if you're going to do that, because who cares? They're literally going to die anyway. Who cares? You know, they're just nobodies who are just going to get thrown into a grinder. Now, you can create characters who are going to get thrown into a grinder. You can create, this kind of goes back to, you know, character roles and purposes. You can absolutely create a character who is set to die at a predetermined point in the story, or is there to die to another player character or an event, what happens. That's cool. That's fine. What I'm saying is, don't build up and flesh out, like, all of these characters that you're using just to kill them, because that's boring. I'm sorry, but that's boring as hell. I'm more interested in the stories that you can tell with them, rather than how you can kill them, yeah? So, the middle ground is obviously have your characters, but don't be afraid to kill them. Yeah? If the story dictates it, kill them. If you get to a point, naturally, in a character's story where you think, damn, this person dying at this moment would really, really hammer home that threat. Or if this character dies here and now, it's like a defining moment for all of these other characters trauma-wise because he was their best friend or whatnot, do it. Don't be afraid to do it, because at the end of the day, it is still furthering of the storyline. Yeah, it's giving other people definable moments, and it's also helping define the stakes of the story. Okay, if this investigative RP that we've created this this ex-police character before, goes out and he 4 out of 5 RPs, yeah, he's with this team leading them, and then just in that 4th roleplay out of the 5, he gets gunned down in this ambush because the bad guys have like completely circumvented and worked around the party and just killed their guide figure. That's going to be defining for them, and it's also going to up the stakes in the story and show shit. Maybe the cult or gang that they're investigating is serious. Like, this is serious business. Good examples of this in Ancerious have been Paradolia, again, in the Coronan Theatre, where a load of characters died permanently, and it upped the stakes for this plotline massively, yeah? And as Drac kindly says in the chat, all worse, because not only did these characters, like, some of them die, they also turned on their allies. And, don't be afraid to have stuff like that happen too. Just don't be afraid to do radical stuff with the story, yeah? Too many story swings can get people just like, whoa, what the hell? Like, what the hell is going on here? But don't be afraid to be a bit radical in story change moments by killing a character or doing a U-turn in the plot or something like that. It helps spice things up, and it helps develop other characters and other stories and things that are going on, yeah? So, next up is character design styles and creating looks for your characters. So, obviously this is kind of going to be a bit of a hard one to describe because I can't exactly go over like styles with you visually, but when creating your character, do think of how they look. Put your character in your mind's eye. Like, when you think of X character person, what do you think of? Like, how do you think they look? Yeah? And then just describe that. Like, oh, they wear fine clothes. You don't have to describe, like, oh, it's a red, elaborate dress with, like, these sequin inlays. And, like, you don't have to do that. You just be like, she has a fine red dress. Or he has, like, scruffy, kind of, like, worn, dirty clothing. Stuff like that. That's fine. Just basic styles that you can kind of go for work for characters. And again, less is more. Also think about how they sound as well. Thinking about how a character sounds is quite integral to their style, in my opinion. Because I find that how a character sounds also kind of defines for me how a character might look. Not to say judging a book by its cover, but you do it enough IRL to be like, you hear somebody's voice and then you turn around and you're like, oh, that's they're kind of how I imagined, or oh, they're not how I imagined, and you could use that to kind of subvert expectations. That is a method for doing so. But when you want to draw your character and draw your style, look up references online. Get about 3 to 5 different clothing references, like a sci-fi shirt or like a nice dress or whatnot, and describe the sort of styles you're going for. Get 3 to 5 different images and different types, and then when you're drawing your character, incorporate all of those different designs that you've taken, like, sort of images of, into your drawing piece. Maybe take the cuffs of a shirt and the collar of another, and a pattern inlay from a third one, and then you could use a certain set of trousers from a fourth with some colour alterations, and then you could potentially use combine two different shoe looks, or maybe add a particular hairstyle to a specific facial kind of sort of, layout, etc. And with this, you could use these references to create your character in a way that looks original and interesting and true to what your character style should be and how you've described them in character. Um, you know, what you don't just want to do is just go online and just take like some random piece of art and just be like, oh yeah, here's my character, or like, you know, you can use AI to get an idea. Like, again, if you want to generate sort of reference images, don't use the AI as a character unless you're trying to do something for a tabletop. I find using AI to generate NPCs for tabletop, um, you know, just like to if you're trying to do a massive crowd of people, or you're trying to create multiple NPCs for a particular encounter, sure, you could use AI to like generate a bunch of people who might look a particular way. Yeah, that's cool. Like, but if you're actually doing like main characters, stuff that's like actually effort characters, stuff that means something to you, just do your own art. Yeah, use the references. Be the references AI or online, but AI stuff, really only use it for throwaway things. Don't use it for like main stuff, alright? Um but try to incorporate as many different things into your style as possible. Um and just try to keep it original in that respect. Don't worry if your character doesn't look exactly as you've envisaged them. Practice makes perfect. I still have trouble drawing specific characters of mine. Like, it happens. It's just a natural one. Um, so, okay. Next one is tropes to avoid. Yeah, this is an interesting one, I guess. I would say a really common trope that you will typically find. There's a couple of tropes. One is the kind of like, I guess, Lone Ranger sits alone at the bar smoking, hat down. Oh, I'm here to investigate this her death for this like particular RP. Kind of like, yeah, I don't usually work for people. Like, I don't usually work with people, and then kind of like doesn't really interact with the party. Um, Kind of like loners slash isolationists is not really a good trope to run with in cooperative character RP. Um, Unless you want, obviously, them to develop into a more outwardly going character that's like very much interactive with the rest of the party. Another trope to avoid is obviously like Mary Sue's. A character that can do everything, is perfect at everything, always wins, suffers no downsides, and suffers no adversity. Nobody is going to care about. Nobody is going to enjoy that. Nobody is going to relate to that, because I certainly can't relate to a Mary Sue character. I'm pretty sure nobody here can either. Like, that's boring as hell. I'm not going to enjoy reading a Mary Sue character, and they're not going to contribute anything to the story either. So avoid Mary Sues at all costs, especially if they're a powerful character like an entity, because the admins will come for you, and unfortunately you'll find out that your entity, Mary Sue slash deity, might not be as powerful as you think it is, if you don't want to take consistent losses with it. Another kind of trope is the edgy edgelord. They're like, I'm amazing, like, teleports behind you, nothing personnel, kid. Super cringy, like, oh, I summon a bolt of darkness and it instantly destroys you, kind of like, just edgy meme lords who use katanas and, like, talk like Shadow the Hedgehog or something. Just please don't do that. I don't need to explain why I don't do that, but, like, please don't do that. We've had characters like that in this group, and it deeply hurts me. We don't need more of them. Another one is kind of like characters who kind of claim that everything is according to their plan, and that they're like, oh, I predicted this, and, like, they're always ready for everything. Like, oh, my character is ready for, always ready for whatever might happen. And then the GM of the roleplay drops a U-turn on you, a plot U-turn, or a really defining moment that is supposed to be impactful. And it's like a defining moment that is going to give your character development and integrity, and allow them to kind of be like, oh my god, like, that just happened? And then they have to kind of mentally process that, and instead they go, I predicted this, and then they immediately try to hard counter it in character. Like, nobody is going to enjoy that, especially if you write them smirking. If you write your characters smirking at moments like that, I am personally going to bring Armin Lakos into that RP, regardless of what RP it is, and I'm going to have him completely genocide everything. Just anything to do with your character. Just never do it. Just, I will be out for you personally if you smirk and do just as planned. Like, we've had so many of that. I have PTSD from that. It's not allowed. Go away. Another kind of a trope that's not good is overly sarcastic characters / like super go happy Joker characters. This is kind of like Marvel, in regards to, you know, you've got your like super serious plot line of this god character is killing everyone and like stuff's going on, but I'm going to insert sarcasm and jokes and humor every 5 minutes, and it completely kills the vibe of the roleplay. And all of these other characters who are not that character are like, yeah, sure, bud, like, what? And it just kind of kills the whole vibe. Don't do that. If it's a serious role play, have it be serious. Of course, have a joke now and again, but the whole like sarcasm at everything is just it really does bring down the kind of like, oh, well, as a GM, it makes you feel like, oh, they're not taking it seriously, like, in character and that character, because you're the one writing that character who's going like, whatever. And that makes the GM think that you don't take his plotline seriously, or her plotline seriously, or her defining plotline seriously, yeah? And it's really kind of, like, problematic in that regard. Another, I wouldn't say it's a trope of a character, but I guess another trope character is a character who never has any idea of what's going on. Mostly because the player out of character hasn't really been reading what's going on, or hasn't really been paying attention, or hasn't really been caring, and it's just kind of like, oh, yeah, like, I'm just doing whatever. Or in character starts like doing something that has nothing to do with what's going on. It's not a trope, but it's definitely something that, like, that will kill roleplays. Because, again, it makes the GM feel like their plot isn't worthwhile to you, and that you don't care enough about it. And because of that, other players will just be like, oh, yeah, that's kind of a bit off. Like, I can't really interact with your character because, you know, they're not doing what we're actually doing. So always make sure to ask what's going on if you're not sure, yeah? Don't just post away with, like, half an idea. Don't ever think that someone is going to be offended at you asking questions in the out-of-character chat about the situation in roleplay. If you are unsure, you know, maybe the group is split up in this particular roleplay, and you're not sure what group you're with because you've kind of, like, not replied for a while, or something's happened, just ask. Don't just post and then kind of, like, make a half fucked up post that's kind of makes no sense. Just roll with it, yeah? Just ask. Like, ask, get the thing, roll with it, done. Just don't get caught up in the whole, like, throwing stuff all out of whack. It's definitely one of those cases where, with tropes to avoid and creating one-off kind of characters, or even sustained characters, know the role play and the situation and the context of what you're going into so that you're making the right character decision for that role play. Don't go into a super serious role play with a character who is ultra sarcastic and jokey and who you don't ever want to die, yeah? At the same time, don't take some ultimate smirk edgelord who's super edgy and is super depressing, like, loner, into a happy slice of life roleplay. Like, just don't do it. Like, just use some common sense. I know that is extremely rare in the RP community, but I ask it of you just this once. So, last but not least, examples of both good and bad characters in Ancerious. So, for good characters, I'm kind of at a loss for who to choose, because we have so many good characters in Ancerious that are just so well done. You've got Armand Lycos, who is this big Sonic godlike guy now. You've got Althea, who is a character in IGT Tabletop. You've got Ruther, or Scrimshaw from, and Gardried from The Haters, from Corona, who, have done all of this awesome stuff that have had defining moments. Christ, you've got, like, you've got, like, Sigrun, you've got Heikel, you've got Desea, you've got all of these individuals who, I can't list them all, I'm sorry. You've got, like, you've got Tetlason, you've got Mariko, you've got, oh, Jesus Christ. I'm sorry, I want to list everyone's characters who I could do by voice, but there's too many. The point being is that Ancerious has had a huge amount of characters who have been both existing built-up characters who have had defining moments happen to them and then have been built up more, as well as characters who have started as literal nobodies and who have had defining moments turn them into well-built-up characters, yeah? So, you've got all of these characters in Ankh who were incredible, and they're incredible for all these different reasons, yeah? And some of them started as throwaways, like Scarlet, for example, or Myrnis, who are both tabletop characters who have also played a major part in the actual, like, writing side of the roleplay, who were initially kind of like part throwaway characters who have now turned into, at least in Scarlet's case, actual galaxy linchpin tier, and in Myrnis's case, like, really influential tier on, like, various plot lines. So, you've got this endless kind of expansion by these characters and this development. So, just keep your ear out, and you'll hear names in the various chats about characters. And if you don't know who that character is, just ask. And you will be told their exploits. And you might think, that character's kind of interesting. And then you'll look out for them in roleplay, and then you'll read about them. And then you might even get to roleplay them with them yourself. And you just have fun. It's just how that works. For bad characters in Ancerious, that's a good topic. So, for who I would consider bad characters, we have to look into the distant past. Okay. First off is a specific timecaster. who we all know and love, who I don't even know if I can call him a bad character anymore because he's been redeemed by Tabletop. He started out as a not even, kind of a Mary Sue, edgy, smirky character who everything was just as planned. But then Tabletops redeemed him into a character who actually did have a plan and kind of was passable. I don't even know what like. Who else has got bad characters? There's a specific bad character that I could name. A specific emperor who was into incest and had no character development whatsoever, and basically just got explained in massive text walls, who everyone hated, who basically, it was all of a show don't tell, and the show part was horrific. He was edgy, he was a Mary Sue, he had incest lore. It was terrible. Just don't go down that route. There was another character who was also a Mary Sue, who was like this emperor of this furry celestial faction, who could like create magical offspring, and it was a barely disguised fetish. That's another trope to avoid, guys. Don't put your fetishes into roleplay, or if you do, at least don't make it front and center. I get having like, oh, this character is something that I kind of like find attractive. Sure, whatever. Like, as long as it's not upfront obvious. But for fuck's sake, if you're going to have your character be blatantly into a particular fetish or built around a particular fetish, just don't roleplay, mate. Just go to an ERP server. It's that simple. Just don't do it. Otherwise, I'm gonna get angry. Is the way I'll put it. Yeah, the High Imperium had many bad characters in terms of, I can't even name any because they're all forgettable. They're all just, just as planned. We're super powerful. I know that we can't actually do anything in character, but we're super powerful. Promise. Just trust us. You know. Yeah, Moralith. That one was really bad. Yeah, whatever the Galactic Knight in Lost Lamb by by you know who. You know, constantly citing that, oh, well, this reminds me of the Fourth Galactic War in my homeverse that nobody has any reference to or knowledge of, and nobody will ever get the context apart from me. And also, I will start threatening people because they're having a knife fight, and I'm also going to completely ignore the big scary thing that the GM put in front of me because, I'm immune to fear after that particular war in Bumfuck 9, where I fought the demons of ultimate darkness and 50 bajillion people got killed, and then he gets shot in the head. You know, just yeah, just don't be idiots. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's another good one. Deck's instance of, I don't even remember his name. This is the thing, the bad characters I don't remember the names of because they're that bad that I forget them. So there was a particular Deck Tro's ambassador that tried to like butt into a character discussion where they then tried to butt into the character discussion to learn about a topic that Deck wanted to learn about in character, because he wanted his nation in character to have the excuse that they were doing everything for the greater good to stop the big bad guys. But he didn't actually in character know that there were big bad guys afoot in the galaxy. However, the two characters who did know about the big bad guys in the galaxy were having a conversation in a particularly isolated part of the building, which he then burst into dramatically to talk about those said big bads. And it was just like, wow, that's blatant metagaming. go fuck yourself. And it killed the roleplay because obviously, like, piss off. I'm not fucking telling you. So, yeah. Don't ever use your characters to forward out of character interests in regards to metagaming, trying to power play, try to stroke your own ego, or trying to force your fetishes, okay? If you try to do that, your character is now no longer a way for people to experience the story and see from their point of view. It's a way for people to see your point of view and how you're trying to get yourself as a person into that story from a quite aggressive standpoint, yeah? So, yeah. In addition, you know, feel free to have your characters deviate from your nation. This is kind of an important one that goes back to tropes. Just because you've got a highly, like, militaristic, giga authoritarian nation, all of your characters don't have to be giga militaristic authoritarians. Like, please don't fall into that kind of, like, same old, same old. Create characters of all sorts, yeah? Just because, you know, a load of people in a country think something doesn't mean that everyone thinks the same. Feel free to just diversify, okay? Otherwise it's going to create some bad kind of, like, character connotations. So, with that, are there any questions? And I do believe that there are some questions already, which is, so what about characters that start off annoying and snarky, but then through the roleplay get forcibly humbled? That's fine. If you want to start that way and have them get developed, that's all okay. It's characters that just stay like that in critical situations that should define them. When instead of using a situation to define your character and have them get humbled or have them whatever, they just go, oh yeah. Like, that's when they turn bad, yeah? The oh, what's her name? Yeah. The Black Sail journalist from Corona. Is it Cassandra? Is it Cassandra? I need to look this up now. I believe is it Cassandra?
She's called Cassandra.
Cool, it is. Thank you. She started out as a kind of, like, snarky, blah 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 blah, like haha. But then Paradolia happened, and she got, like, character 180 in terms of she now takes things very much seriously. She is still snarky and makes offhand snarky comments, but it's always with this dark demeanor of, like, this shit happened. And I love it. It's the perfect example of how to switch characters around and give credence to major things that are happening. There was another thing earlier. As an outside to Ant character RPs, there are RPs that have potential of character death, and there are characters that players know shouldn't die just yet. Naturally, you don't bring characters to those that you need to those kind of RPs, but I know from other RP groups that sometimes players go to the complete opposite side of the spectrum and bring throwaway characters that they just make up on the spot. What is your advice on approaching these types of RPs? And is bringing only throwaway characters a valid approach? Of course it's a valid approach. If you want to make a throwaway character to an RP where you know that death is a possibility, feel free. You can always use that character to die in the RP to further the RP and the other characters, and then you go, yeah, that's my contribution to that RP, guys. Have a nice day. Perfectly fine. If you want to do a more built-up character to those RPs, that's fine. Just because a roleplay says that there is a chance of death doesn't mean that there will be death. Yeah? It means, generally, if a roleplay in Ancerious says that there is a chance of death or crippling injury, yeah, it usually means that there comes points in that RP where there is a chance for those things to happen, okay? And then it is up to you to write that, yeah? Should you wish to step up to the line, okay? Now, obviously, don't just bring loads and loads of throwaways to those RPs, because it does kind of cheapen it, yeah? If, like, all the characters are dying, like, it's a bit meh. But obviously, throwaways can turn into developed characters, just know, and you'll feel this, and this comes more obviously easier with time. You will feel in a point in the RP where it will make sense for your character to get hurt or even to die, okay? And you might want to talk to other players about that. I'm thinking so and so might die. What do you think? And see what people say. And if the general consensus is like, yeah, that's cool, go for it. If people are like, I don't know, they're kind of cool, like, they could do this more stuff, and then another person says, actually, I want this person to die, I made them to die, or like, actually I was planning on this moment, then they could do it instead. Work with other people in the roleplay, including the GM. Just because, again, it says, death is a possibility, doesn't mean that the GM is just like gonna sit there from the sidelines staring at you waiting for somebody to die. Like, they will work with you. And to give you an example, I have had multiple instances in Mortal Coil where I've had quite a few people come to me in DMs and say, Myrick, at this allotted time, I would like my character to get crippled, or I would like my character to die. Yeah? And because of that, I've then known when to drop those moments and know that those moments are going to have suitable impact. For example, Thandray, that Brank ran in the last Mortal Coil, died. Okay? No, was it Thandray? I think it might be Thandray. No, Ezekiel. Ezekiel died in Mortal Coil, and that was a big sort of moment for that. In addition, I also had Canis come to me beforehand in Mortal Coil and ask for his big leader character to get completely humbled and almost killed. Again, I had the perfect moment for that. So, feel free to work with the GM, and you can come to the GM and be like, hey, I've got this character, I made them as a throwaway for this RP, I'd kind of like some decent development for them to die, but is it okay if they get killed in your RP? And then the GM can be like, yay or nay, yes, I have a particular moment in mind, etc. No, but maybe it can happen depending on the situation, yeah? But it depends on the roleplay, because you can have these throwaway characters who are meant to die, or who have been created for a particular roleplay in mind, but through defining actions might become quite well known. And because of that, they can still die. Don't be afraid if you have a character who has been built up, yeah, and has kind of become beloved, but you intended to kill them. Don't be afraid to kill them still, because it can still help impact the plot, yeah? And they could then become remembered forever for it. Swing puts in the chat, Blasto, Cass, Karnak, the Preacher, etc. They've all become kind of household names while being throwaway characters. But obviously, yeah, don't just bring like a billion throwaway characters to an RP that don't have any character development, that are just going to get killed for the sake of being killed. That will cheapen the story, if it's a particular one. Unless the whole story is supposed to be about mass character death. It depends. That one's very contextual. So, what about having that one OC that you're not okay with them being killed off, but want to use them in the major plots, but okay with them being repeatedly heavily injured instead if it comes to that? That's fine. Again, talk to the GM about it, because for the most part, they're going to be fine with them just getting like heavily injured. It's obviously just going to be one of those cases where, unless the party giga fucks up and the worst case scenario happens, you don't have to forcibly take the death, and you can work with the GM. Yeah, don't worry about that. And as Blue says, throwaways are a great way to keep a vibrant world where people reach their peak and fade. Like, one of the things that you need to be worried about is stagnation for stories and characters. The same character doing the same thing again and again and again. Death helps that. as do swapping out characters and changing them, etc. That's why I said it's good to have a repertoire of a few characters that you can sort of swap in and swap out. Thankfully, in a group like Ancerious, there's enough new players, new factions, new characters that are kind of always coming in that I don't feel any like sort of sterile situations have occurred yet, which is quite nice, which is always good. Are there any tips you would give to writing overly evil characters to others that, if in question something similar wasn't covered in the villains discussion? Given characters like Alcamavir, Las Lucis, AOTD exist. Okay, I don't think so. Like, I think most of the stuff was covered in the villain talk. Although I will say, obviously, like, feel free to have them be as horrific as possible. Just be aware the line you're towing when it comes to, like, writing how awful the stuff they're doing is. Like, don't go too graphic. Otherwise it just kind of becomes a bit more of a, I guess, kind of like stat posting, but hey Hitler, how evil can I be? You know what I mean? Shock posting, yeah. And yeah, I think Swing has a good point there in that a cartoonishly evil villain character who is just absolutely despicable and is doing all this horrific stuff needs to have a really pathetic element to them in terms of, like, something that's happened to them, or they don't have the power themselves, or they're just trying to get petty revenge, or, like, any number of reasons that somebody would look at them and just go, like, wow, you're really kind of sad, you know that? Like, you're really kind of pathetic, like, for the reason that you're doing this. It kind of helps with the whole Giga Evil element. Immortal characters, you need to change the stakes, yes. Obviously, they could be very much injured. Maybe they could even be killed, and then they come back again. That's one of the things where you just kind of put them in with different stakes, different situations, different stories to keep them from being sterile. Hey, I'm wondering about making a character for the setting, but I'm not sure well how to make a character that's memorable. So I kind of covered that in the earlier bits of this discussion. This is recorded, so you'll get to sort of read back in it. But there are distinguishing moments in role plays that will turn regular people into memorable people. A lot of the people in the Coronan Theatre were regular people until they experienced Pareidolia and Horseman fleets. So, another question: what tips are there on managing characters out of character? In the sense that sometimes I'm a bit apprehensive about talking about characters, so I'm unsure if I'm just pushing my law. So, obviously, managing characters, you can have a Google Doc, you could have a Google Sheets, any way to list them down if you're, like, kind of wanting to just kind of have a note to yourself about who's doing what, etc. I know there's a fair few in this group who do that, like, note it all down and stuff, which is cool. Definitely go for that. Being apprehensive about talking about your characters, just talk about them. Just go to a gen dev or go to ideas dumps and just go, boom, this is my character, this is what they're like, this is their development. What do you think needs to be added? Like, what, like, do you like it? What would you change, etc.? And just get it out there. And then maybe someone will go, oh, that's a cool character. I'd like to do an RP with them. And then, run off of that, Don't be apprehensive. Don't be afraid of pushing your lore, okay? And your characters. We have had enough guests over the years who have just spurged out in all the gen devs about, like, a billion different stat posts and everything. There is absolutely nothing wrong with established members going into gen devs and just posting their stuff and getting feedback on it. In fact, tonight, I will add 2 more gen devs to this server. Just to make you post your goddamn stuff, alright? and because I've noticed that they've been quite in use lately. Um, so get out there and talk about your shit, yeah, and enjoy it. So any other questions? Or is that it? It's been a long talk tonight. Actually, that's very good. Unfortunately, I can't see the aurora borealis at the moment, which is a shame. Bloody weather. Okay, so with no more questions, I will leave it there for the night. But thank you all for coming, and I will catch you next time.